are joined again by a new member who is going to share her reflection with us, and that's Anna Dearson. And just as a brief bit of introduction, Anna moved to Houghton from Colorado last July, but she cautioned me to make sure that I said that maybe don't call her a Coloradan because she prefers her heritage as a Wisconsinite instead. She loves to run in any season. That means she runs in the winter as well. And she spends time outdoors with her family. Anna worked as a mechanical engineer for 5 years before deciding to pursue the professoriate, and she is now an assistant professor of mechanical engineering at Tech. And I am very pleased to introduce Anna Dearson and her talk on the value of diversity in science. Good morning, Anna.
Yes, hi. Thanks, Paul. So today I'm preaching to the choir. Diversity and inclusion are core UU values, and I think that most agree that the representation of women and minorities in the workforce is valuable. So I don't need to really convince you of that. But there are many places that you could read about diversity and its value to a company, to their bottom line, to communities and the health of communities. But I want to focus specifically on the value of diversity for science. I want to explore the concept that science is more innovative, outcomes are more equitable, and technology improves when science teams are diverse. So I'm actually not an expert in this topic. I'm a curious learner, and I know there are experts in our community. But I want to bring up the topic to continue our conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community and share my story along the way. Just a quick sound check. I know this room can be echoey, so let me know if that's an issue. I can make a change, but we're good. Okay, I'll launch in then. So for those of you that haven't met, as Paul said, I'm Anna and I'm a mechanical engineer. That particular sentence is something I've been saying with intention in the last few years, because for years I thought that I was just maybe a scientist that got a couple of engineering degrees by chance, or maybe I was a person that just happened to walk into an engineering school and walk out with a couple of degrees by some mishap. Because I thought if I were an engineer, I shouldn't have been born with a wrench in my hand and a desire to maybe fix your car or something. But that's actually why my first degree wasn't technically in mechanical engineering. It was in engineering mechanics, slightly different field that's more mathy, and it didn't require me to try to fit in with mechanical engineers. People that I perceived were all men, and they were all in the basement. I don't know why I thought they were in the basement, but I just had this image that they were all in the basement and they were all working on cars. And that's what I would have to do if I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. So in other words, I perceived it as the following choice. I'm going to share screen share here with you. So I was, in my mind, it was the figure on the left, if I was going to be a mechanical engineer, versus the figure on the right. And the thing on the right is like, it felt, a place that I could fit in more easily. So I chose that path. No offense to this person fixing something on the left. It's just a photo I got off of the website pexels.com. But ultimately, after my first degree, I came back to mechanical engineering because I realized that that was actually the degree I needed that was most fitting for the work that I did want to do. And so I worked as a mechanical engineer, I went back to school, and then I went back to work. And through that, I now have a more complete understanding that this is what it looks like for me. So I wasn't the type of person that was born with a wrench in my hand. And no, I don't know how to fix your car. I'm not the person you should call. However, if you give me the owner's manual for your car, I would actually be happy to read all the technical jargon in depth, and I would figure it out. And I'd be happy to make a mathematical model of your car. I'd find that interesting, or anything else that we wanted to make a model of. I love to use problem-solving skills on problems that I'm passionate about. And yes, occasionally I like to tinker. So when I finished my PhD in mechanical engineering, it kind of dawned on me. I realized that if I wasn't a mechanical engineer, who was? Was it only going to be the guys in the shop? Was that literally going to be it? And I decided, no, I don't like that answer. I just needed to own it. And that's why I say that I'm Anna and I'm a mechanical engineer. Mechanical engineers use problem-solving skills in a variety of contexts. We bring together knowledge on topics such as material strength, design, thermal fluids, optimization. to solve a lot of different problems. For me, this slide shows my research interests are in renewable energy, grid operations, climate change, water use, energy efficiency. The figure on the top right is some measurements I did in grad school for solar resource assessment. So I hope that the more that I say the phrase, I'm a mechanical engineer, instead of saying that I work in mechanical engineering or that I teach in mechanical engineering, the more that students will understand the variety of things that engineers can be and do. Sprinkled throughout this talk, I'm just going to pause for a second and put up a reflection question. So here, if you wanted to think about this further, I think what I'm really highlighting is, what role does identity have in choosing a career, and is that malleable? So I won't ask you to necessarily respond, but just give you a moment to think about that while as I continue. Okay, so now that I've explained that I am a mechanical engineer and what that means to me, let me tell you what diversity does for engineering and other science, technology, math, and medicine fields, which you've likely heard mentioned as STEM before, and that's the phrase that I'll use to talk about these fields, STEM. Before I start, I just want to mention here that I want to be mindful that I don't want it to seem that we need to prove that certain people belong, like that we need to prove that women and minorities belong in science by showing their value. What I'm trying to get at is just promoting all of our value for the benefit of science. So there's two ways I want to talk about this. The first is to talk about what diversity does for science. The most critical way, I think, is kind of from that angle. So what I've been doing is a little bit of reading and finding some research that supports this, what might seem like an obvious statement that diversity improves science outcomes. So here's a sort of a laundry list of a couple of studies that I found. One is that they've found that gender diverse teams improve a measure of collective intelligence. So if you look at teams that are either all men or all women, they're not as wise as those that are a mix of both. And another study said that women more correctly identified team members' expertise. And if you could identify the expertise of the team members in your group, you can take advantage of it, right? And then that's a way that outcomes can be improved by leveraging all of the skills that are within your team. We also know that women-dominated teams, author teams, engage in different research topics and therefore broaden the impact of the research that's being done. Another study said that in the medical literature in particular, a single woman author on a team increased the likelihood that the study would use gender and sex-based analysis. And doing that type of analysis in medicine is known to improve diagnosis and treatment of disease. So those came from one opinion piece that sort of brought together a bunch of literature, and I'll provide all of these references at the end in case you want to dig further. Another separate study found they use actually analytics to quantify the increased innovation that comes from non-majority groups in science. So they looked at a variety of different science fields and looked at whether it was by gender or race, and they showed that when you were not in the majority in your field, that your work was more innovative. But they also uncovered a paradox wherein more novel contributions of those underrepresented minorities were less recognized. So that's sort of a whole nother issue. Finally, and I think really interesting for me as an engineer is I found a summary of design problems where they found that a bias for designing for men, from everything from seatbelts to personal protective equipment used in construction and other jobs, increased the hazards for women. And so thinking about, the engineering field, how we design products, who's designing the products, who's thinking about who's going to use the products really affects the safety of those products for different groups. And that's certainly not a comprehensive list, but I found it to be a really interesting start. And I want to note here too that in my brief literature review, it was easier to find articles that address gender diversity than other aspects of a diversity. So there's certainly more to learn there. I think all of this combined with the other studies that have been done outside of science fields, that have been done in industry, in business, all of that together, I think is pretty convincing for the value of diversity for improving the outcomes of science. There's another way to think about this, which is to examine the workforce. So I'm going to go back to the screen share here and think about the workforce. So most folks would agree that the STEM workforce is essential to economic growth. According to one study called Promising Practices, STEM fields are significantly less diverse than the population as a whole. And I thought this was a striking figure for that. I believe they pulled it from National Science Foundation data. And you can see that in science and engineering occupations, the fraction of women and other groups is significantly less than it is in the US population, in most groups, though not all. And so that just highlights the fact that the representation is very far from the population that's using the products and the science and the medicine that these professionals in these particular occupations are creating. So we can't achieve the goals of prosperity and growth without the full workforce. Another report called Why So Few described how STEM jobs offer more stability and better salaries for the workers. And so this, just improves the quality of life for everyone that has access to those jobs. And I think we all want folks to have the best opportunities for their families that they can. Here's another figure that highlights specifically, it's a bit older data, but highlights specific fields and breaks down on the left. It's showing bachelor's degrees earned in select science and engineering fields. So, significantly more for men, and some subfields do have more for women that tend to be biological sciences. And as you get into the engineering and computer sciences, it gets slimmer and slimmer. So that's kind of highlighted on the right. Another way of looking at it is looking at not who got the degree, but who's still working in the STEM occupation once they're out in the workforce. And so on the right, it's showing you the fraction of women that are employed in those fields. And way down on the right, you get to your engineers, right? Your electrical engineers and your mechanical engineers. At that time, it was shown to be less than 10%. All of this just to highlight the huge opportunity for just more access to those good jobs for more people. Here, I want to pause and offer the reflection question that really came up a lot when I was putting this talk together, which is, do you think that talking about the value of diversity for science is problematic because it might suggest that some groups only belong if they improve outcomes, rather than the fact that everyone belongs just as a matter of fact? And so this just occurred to me because it almost felt transactional to say, right, like you are invited, we are invited to this group if we have value there, which I don't, is really not what we mean, but just something to reflect on, like, is this a useful way of talking about this issue, or does it sort of feel a bit too transactional? Personally, all of this resonates for me because I love my work. I love the opportunities it's afforded me. To name a few, I've been able to travel. I've lived in several different places doing this research that I really care about. In the last few years, my husband has been able to be a stay-at-home parent, as he had long wanted to be a stay-at-home parent. And I've had rewarding work, and I've have work that I know that I can continue to do and continue to learn and grow into for a long time, which is pretty important. But I say this because I recognize that I had a significant amount of privilege getting here, right? So if I come with all this privilege, even I almost slipped through the cracks a few times. My privilege comes from the fact that my parents had high expectations. They both went to college. They just assumed that my sisters and I would go to college and expected us to do well, and gave us the time and resources to do that. For me, what it looked like is I did grow up on a farm, so I did have other chores that I needed to do. But if I got my chores done, if I stick to the books, right, stay out of trouble, I could pursue what I wanted to do, which was engineering. On top of that, my older sister had already gone into the field of engineering. So the road was very paved for me, right? But even in that, like, acknowledging my relative privilege, I want to give an anecdote about how I almost did slip through the cracks in one case. So in my first or second year of engineering school, I remember the first 2D drawing class that I had. I'd easily survived chemistry and calculus. That stuff made sense to me. But then I got to this 2D drawing class, and it looked totally like they were asking me to understand these 2D drawings, and I just did not know what they were asking. I just looked like Greek, right? So here's an example of that. I looked at the page, and they're asking you, so you have like a top view and a side view of something that's going to be built, and then you need to understand it in 3 dimensions. So there's usually like a missing view that you have to draw. And quick quiz, everybody, do you think that you could complete this drawing? So there's a missing view here, there's a right view. Do you think you could complete that drawing? Okay, I want to take a poll. I was going to poll you on your answer to that, but I thought that was not fair. So instead, I'm just going to poll on if that question made your blood pressure go up. Yes or no? So the poll's open, click yes or no. Did asking you if you could complete that drawing make your blood pressure go up? Okay, I've got about half responses. So did looking at that drawing even make your blood pressure go up? We kind of have a mixed response so far. I'm going to share this for you once it's done in just 1 minute. Okay, so looks like I'll share the results. We're 50-50, which means that 50% of us feel confident and 50% of us, that's an uncomfortable question, right? Fair enough, no problem. So to continue my story, I'll come back to that, but to continue my story, this is, by the way, this is the answer. Looking around me in that classroom, right, when I just didn't know how to look at something like that, it looked like, it seemed to me that everybody else was getting it just fine. And they're mostly, young men in the class, and they seemed to just have no problem with it. And so I thought, okay, I guess this is where I just really fail. I guess I don't belong in this career. I guess I wasn't cut out for it. If everybody else can do this and I can't. That was sort of one of the few moments that I had in my engineering studies and career where I almost just thought this isn't the right place for me. But a good teacher can make all the difference. The TA in that course noticed, took the time to guide me through just a couple of drawings. It didn't take much. And soon enough, I had it all down and it made perfect sense. I learned the language, right? Thinking about it years later, I understood that the other students in that class had some background experience. Maybe they had a high school shop class. Maybe they took a pre-engineering course in high school. Maybe they had some other personal experience where looking at this drawing made sense to them. So I want you to know that if you are one of 50% of the population that looked at that drawing and it made your blood pressure go up, it doesn't mean that you can't be an engineer. It just means that you're not an engineer yet. And thank goodness for that teacher, because he understood the growth mindset. The growth mindset means that just because you don't understand something or can't do something doesn't mean you don't have the capability or the wherewithal to do it with the proper resources and work. And that was just one of a few near misses that happened for me. Side note, was it a coincidence that TA that pulled me out and just helped me get through that moment was a Black man? I don't know. Entirely possible that it was a coincidence. Or it could be that gave him the ability to recognize that I was about to slip through the cracks, and that with a little bit of help, I, would not slip through the cracks. And I think we can all agree that that folks should have the opportunity to pursue the type of work that they want to. So I took an all-female engineering course in my first year of engineering school, and thinking back on that sort of cohort of women that started with me, a lot of them didn't end up graduating in engineering. And of course, it's totally fine. Many of them may have found other more rewarding careers that fit their interests, but I know some of them, and I know that some of them wanted to finish, but couldn't find their way. So that's why diversity in STEM matters to me, because from my relatively privileged position, I can see how there are many that wouldn't get the chance to even try a STEM major, wouldn't be able to complete the major, would drop out of the workforce due to all the different barriers, microaggressions, and extra baggage that go along with being a minority within that workforce. So what I want, and what I think we all want, is for everyone to have the same opportunity to succeed in the career they choose, and in order to produce the best science outcomes that we can have. Reflect on that for a moment. Go back here. Just what I would offer up there as a reflection is how your own experiences, being both privileged and sometimes excluded, help you to understand the lived experience of others. Because I think we've all had moments of both, right? And so how does that help us understand the lived experiences of others? So to wrap up, you may have noticed that I didn't tackle some of the hardest questions, right? I only hit on a piece of this. For example, I didn't fully explore how people of color or people that fall into intersectional categories like Black women in science, for example. I didn't address the specific barriers or demographics even there. And I didn't explain why it is that women and minorities are underrepresented. And I didn't say exactly how to improve this representation. I really focused on the value of representation for science and a little bit about my story. So knowing this crowd, I know that you'll want to read more perhaps and see some references. So I'll leave it at that with just a reminder of some of the reflections we can do and some of the references that were useful to me. Thanks.